We discovered we're all siblings, and our father lied to every one of us Reddit stories. I guess if you had asked anyone who knew us back then, they'd have told you we were the picture of a perfect family. Not the kind of perfection you see in glossy magazine spreads, of course. Not the manicured smiles or the summer vacations in Tuscany, but the sort of down-to-earth, sticky-floored, slightly chaotic type of perfect that smells like home, baked bread, and sounds like laughter echoing from the backyard. We had our quirks, our habits, our traditions, and even our silent tensions, but we were close, tightly knit. A circle that didn't break, or so we thought. It wasn't until much later, when everything unraveled, that I realized how fragile our version of perfection really was, and how a single thread, once tugged, could expose everything we'd carefully hidden beneath layers of love and loyalty. Back in those days, Sundays were sacred. My father, always the earliest riser, would start his morning routine before the sun had fully stretched across the sky. The hum of his coffee maker was the first sound I heard, followed by the faint creak of the kitchen floorboards and the soft sizzle of bacon in the pan. My mother would be next, descending the stairs in her faded blue robe, her hair piled into a messy bun, humming something tuneless as she reached for her mug. By the time my younger sister and I stumbled into the kitchen, the table was already set, orange juice poured, newspaper neatly folded, and the house filled with that unmistakable blend of breakfast aromas and calm familiarity. It was ordinary, yes, but the kind of ordinary that feels eternal, the kind you cling to without realizing until it's gone. Our home was a modest colonial-style place in a sleepy Connecticut suburb, nestled between two almost identical houses with trimmed hedges and wind chimes on the porch. We knew all our neighbors by name, swapped Christmas cookies in December, and shoveled each other's driveways when the snow piled too high. My dad worked as a civil engineer. Practical, methodical, always with a pencil tucked behind his ear. And my mom taught second grade at the local elementary school, beloved by her students and feared by PTA members for her no-nonsense attitude and unshackable poise. They'd met in college, fell in love over study sessions and shared textbooks, and built a life brick by brick, always emphasizing honesty, education, and family above all. From the outside, we were everything you might want to emulate. My sister, Emily, was the star. Straight A's, varsity soccer, school plays. I was more reserved, quieter, the observer rather than the participant, the one who watched rather than performed. But even then, I felt connected to all of it, part of the tapestry. Every birthday, every holiday, every spontaneous road trip, each added another patch to that shared quilt of memories. And maybe that's why I never questioned anything. Maybe that's why, when the first signs appeared, I brushed them off as coincidence, because to question one thread meant risking the unraveling of everything. It began subtly, the way most things do. A locked drawer in my father's study that had never been locked before. Late-night phone calls that ended abruptly when someone else picked up. My mother's brief, unreadable expressions that flickered across her face like a forgotten memory returning for a second too long. They weren't red flags, not at first. Just oddities. Loose moments that didn't quite fit, like pieces from another puzzle forced into place. I noticed them, sure, but in the same way you notice a creaky stair or a flickering light. You think, I should look into that, and then you move on, lulled by the rhythm of the life you know. But then came the photo. It was buried deep in the attic, inside an old box labeled college stuff, one of many stacked along the far wall beneath decades of dust and forgotten Christmas decorations. I hadn't meant to find it. I was searching for a spare extension cord, rummaging through boxes with a flashlight clenched between my teeth, when the lid fell off and a cluster of Polaroids spilled out. Most were typical. My parents in baggy sweaters, holding red plastic cups at some party, smiling, carefree, young. But one caught my eye immediately. It wasn't the setting. It was clearly taken at a park, maybe early spring, but the expression. My father wasn't smiling. He was holding a baby, not Emily or me, a child too young to place in any known timeline. And the woman beside him wasn't my mother. That one photograph felt like a stone dropped into a still pond. The ripples didn't appear right away. I tucked it back into the box and didn't mention it to anyone. Maybe I didn't want to know the truth, or maybe I convinced myself there was a logical explanation. An old family friend, a cousin, a classmate helping out with a babysitting job. Rationalizations came quickly, almost too easily. But once that seed had been planted, I couldn't help but notice everything else with new eyes. The way my father sometimes disappeared into his study for hours, the sudden tension at dinner when the topic of extended family came up, the phone number on the notepad near the landline, scratched out hastily but still legible. And finally, the name, one I'd never heard before, scribbled beside it, Rachel. I didn't ask him directly. I wasn't ready. Instead, I started piecing things together like a detective in one of those crime shows my mom used to watch when she thought no one else was awake. I searched old yearbooks, scanned our family photo albums, even dug through my mother's dresser drawers when no one was home. It felt wrong, invasive, but something inside me had shifted. I wasn't looking for proof anymore. I was looking for certainty. I needed to know if the image I'd built of my family was real or just a careful illusion. The deeper I dug, the more the edges frayed. There were letters hidden in the back of a closet inside a box labeled tax documents. Dozens of them, all addressed to my father, all signed by the same name, Rachel. Some were recent, others dated back over a decade. The content varied. Updates about someone's schooling, photographs, birthday wishes. One even mentioned meeting someday soon. I read every one, my hands trembling, my mind racing to connect the dots. By the time I finished, one truth had become painfully clear. My father had another child, a child we never knew existed, a daughter. At first, I felt angry, not just at him, but at all of it. The lies, the secrecy, the betrayal. How could he keep something so monumental hidden for so long? How could my mother live beside him, share a life with him, and never say a word? Or worse, what if she had known all along? The foundation of everything I'd believed about my family started to crack, not with a bang but with the soft, relentless pressure of disbelief. I stopped sleeping. My appetite disappeared. I avoided family dinners, skipped phone calls, withdrew from everything that once felt safe and familiar. But curiosity has a way of eclipsing even the deepest wounds. Once the pain dulled, I found myself wondering about her. This half-sister I never knew I had. What did she look like? Was she anything like me? Did she even know I existed? The letters didn't say, but they mentioned a town, an address, and a school she'd graduated from 2 years earlier. That was all I needed. I told myself I was just going to drive by, nothing more. A simple glance, a harmless peek into another life. I didn't plan to knock on the door. I didn't even know what I'd say if I did. But as I turned onto the quiet street lined with maple trees and brick houses, my heart pounding with every passing mailbox, I realized something had already shifted in me. I wasn't the same person who'd grown up in that tidy Connecticut home. I wasn't just my father's daughter anymore. I was something in between, caught between two worlds, two truths, two versions of family. And whatever came next, whatever I found when I reached that final address, I knew there was no going back. Because some secrets, once uncovered, change everything, not just the past, but the present, the future, and the very meaning of who we are. I didn't knock. I sat in the car across the street, windows halfway down, the summer heat settling over me like a second skin, and just stared. The house was playing. 2-story vinyl siding, a tired basketball hoop nailed above the garage, paint flaking off the backboard in tired curls. A rusted tricycle lay tipped on its side near the porch, and a wind chime clinked lazily in the breeze. It was quiet. Too quiet. And yet, everything about it felt alive, as if the air itself hummed with the weight of lives I'd never known, memories I hadn't been part of. This was her home, her world, a place where my father had left pieces of himself behind while pretending we were his whole story. I stayed there for nearly an hour, the engine off, fingers drumming against the steering wheel, rehearsing conversations I would never have the courage to start. Eventually, someone came out. A woman, maybe early 30s, with dark hair pulled back and a laundry basket balanced on her hip. She looked so ordinary, so grounded in her own life, that I suddenly felt like an intruder, a ghost hovering at the edges of a world that had never invited me in. I drove away before she saw me. Back home, everything felt sharper. Every corner of our house seemed to whisper the words I couldn't say aloud. At dinner that night, I watched my father closely. The way he chewed slower than usual, the way he reached for the salt absent-mindedly, how he asked Emily about her soccer practice like nothing had changed. But everything had changed. The air between us felt brittle. My mother was unusually quiet too, and for the first time, I noticed how her eyes lingered on him a fraction longer than normal, as if she was waiting for something. Or maybe she already knew. Maybe she'd been waiting for years. I wanted to scream. I wanted to grab that photo from the attic and slam it on the table and demand answers. But I didn't, because what do you do when the person who shaped your life turns out to be a stranger wearing a familiar face? I stopped sleeping again. My thoughts spun endlessly, replaying scenes from my childhood and trying to fit them into this new framework, this new truth. Every memory became suspect. I started to notice how often my dad would disappear on weekends, claiming to be visiting an old college buddy or attending a work conference. I remembered the locked drawer in his study and the way he flinched once when Emily accidentally opened it before he snapped it shut. And then the phone calls, those brief, clipped conversations where he'd step outside or speak in hushed tones. They'd always been there. I just hadn't wanted to see them. Or maybe I'd been trained not to look too closely. But once you start seeing, it's impossible to stop. One night, long after the rest of the house had gone to sleep, I tiptoed into his study. I knew the drawer would be locked, but I'd found the key earlier that day tucked inside one of his old coats in the front closet. My hands shook as I turned the lock. Inside were folders, paperwork, envelopes, receipts, but also photographs, recent ones, of her, of them. There she was again, the woman from the laundry basket, standing beside my father at what looked like a high school graduation, and beside them, a girl, young, maybe 17, with a cap on her head and a diploma clutched in her hand. Her smile was radiant, and the way my father looked at her, it was unmistakable. Pride, love, familiarity. He wasn't a visitor in her life. He was part of it, fully, deeply, undeniably, and yet not a word. Not once had he mentioned her. The girl's name was written on the back of one of the photos, Madeline, June 2023. Madeline, my half-sister. I stared at that name for what felt like hours, letting it seep into my consciousness like ink into fabric. There was no undoing it now, no pretending I didn't know. And yet, knowing didn't bring clarity. It only deepened the questions. Did she know about me? About Emily? Had she spent years wondering who we were, resenting our existence, or had she been kept just as much in the dark? Were we a betrayal to her? Just as she felt like one to me, I decided I had to see her, not from a car window, not from the periphery, face to face. Maybe it was selfish, maybe it was reckless, but I needed answers, not from my father, not from dusty letters, but from her. I wanted to understand who she was and what part of her I might share, if any. So I wrote her a letter. A real one, no return address, no signature. Just a few lines scrawled in trembling ink. We might be more connected than you think. I saw you last week. I didn't have the courage to speak then, but I'd like to now. If you want to know more, meet me by the lake near Crandall Park this Saturday, noon. I slid it into her mailbox early the next morning, heart pounding, adrenaline making my hands numb. Saturday arrived like a storm cloud. I got there early, sitting on the same bench where I used to feed ducks as a kid, the water rippling with each passing breeze. I had no idea if she'd come. No way of knowing if she'd read the letter, or if she'd thrown it out. But just before noon I saw her, walking alone. Same graduation smile. Same eyes. Eyes I now realized looked eerily like my own. She approached slowly, uncertain, scanning the area until her gaze landed on me. She hesitated for a second, then walked toward the bench. She sat beside me, not speaking at first, just watching the lake. "I don't know who you are," she finally said, her voice low and calm, "but I recognized your handwriting. You were in one of the letters. My mom showed me," she said. "You might come one day." My breath caught. "She knew about me?" I asked. She nodded. "She knew about all of you. She said it wasn't your fault," said he. "Your dad tried to keep us separate to protect everyone, but she always believed we'd find each other." I didn't know what to say. I just stared ahead, the water suddenly too bright, too loud. "I didn't know about you until I was 10, she continued. "My mom finally told me the truth, that I had sisters, that he had another life. I used to imagine what you were like, whether you'd hate me, whether you'd ever want to know me. I didn't think this would actually happen." I turned to her then, really looked at her. She wasn't angry. She wasn't defensive. She was just sad. The kind of sadness that comes from long waiting, from being a secret someone else chose to keep. "I didn't hate you," I said. "I didn't even know you existed. But now that I do, I can't stop thinking about everything that's been kept from us. About how much of my life was built on lies." She smiled softly. "Men too." We sat there in silence for a long time, letting the stillness wrap around us like a bandage. Two strangers, bound by blood and betrayal, trying to make sense of the pieces. She eventually stood. "I should go. My mom worries if I'm gone too long." I nodded, but before she walked away, she turned back. "You should meet her someday. She's not the villain you probably imagine. None of this is simple." I believed her. Somehow I did. I watched her walk away, my mind buzzing with thoughts, possibilities, fears, and questions. Always questions. When I got home that evening, the atmosphere in the house was different. Heavy. Like the air knew what I'd done. My father was in his study again, the door ajar. I stood there for a long moment before pushing it open. He looked up, startled, then quickly masked it. "Something wrong?" he asked. I stepped inside, my heart thudding. "I know about her," I said. No anger, no accusation, just truth. He froze. The color drained from his face. For a moment, he looked 10 years older. Then he sat back slowly, exhaling like the weight of years had finally been dropped. "I was going to tell you," he whispered. "I always meant to. But the longer I waited, the harder it got." I didn't reply. Just stood there, watching him unravel. "Her name is Madeline," he continued. "She's my daughter. I never stopped being part of her life, but I thought I could compartmentalize. That I could give her part of me, and give the rest to you and your sister." I told myself I was protecting everyone, but really I was protecting myself. I didn't stay long after that. I didn't shout or cry or demand explanations. I just left. Because there are moments when words are useless, when emotions swell too large for language to contain. And as I walked back up the stairs, I realized something that terrified me more than the lie itself. This wasn't over. This was just the beginning. Because if my father had kept one secret this big, what else was he hiding? What else about our family was fiction dressed as truth? The answers weren't in his study. They weren't even in Madeline's world. They were buried deeper, hidden in the folds of time. And I was going to find them, whatever the cost. I don't remember exactly when I stopped calling him Dad in my head. It just faded. Like an old stain that never quite washes out. The word thinned out until it barely meant anything anymore. Outwardly, everything stayed the same for a while. We still had dinner at the table, still made weekend plans, still performed the rituals of a normal family. But it was all theater, polite choreography masking the fact that something sacred had been broken. And once something like that cracks, you start seeing fissures everywhere, in places you never looked twice before. That was how I stumbled upon the box. It happened on a rainy Thursday when the school closed early due to power outages. I got home before everyone else. the sky heavy with thunder and the sharp scent of wet pavement trailing me through the front door. With hours to kill and a growing itch in my chest, I wandered the house restlessly, each room feeling more foreign than the last. I ended up in the basement, not for any particular reason, just letting my feet guide me through the familiar dimness and cold concrete floor, the hum of the dehumidifier purring in the corner like a sleeping animal. Behind the water heater, there was an old cabinet I'd never paid attention to. It was half covered by cobwebs and paint cans, the wood swollen from years of dampness. On a whim, I tugged it open. Inside were dusty VHS tapes, photo albums, and a nondescript cardboard box with no label, taped shut in a rush. Its edges uneven, the cardboard torn in places like it had been opened and resealed too many times. My heart quickened. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was everything. I carried it upstairs, heart racing, and placed it carefully on my bed. My fingers hesitated just before peeling the tape, as if undoing it would also undo something in me. The first thing I saw was a stack of letters, some yellowed with age, some newer, all addressed to my father, but with different handwriting, different return addresses. Many were from Rachel, the same looping, steady script I remembered from the letters hidden in the study. But others were from someone else entirely, a name I didn't recognize, Eleanor Whitfield. Each letter was like a breath from a different life. Some were short, others several pages long. Eleanor wrote about a child. Our son, she called him. She wrote about music lessons, illnesses, birthdays missed. There were receipts too, medical bills, a paternity test sealed in an envelope marked confidential. I opened it with trembling hands and saw my father's name printed at the top. The result, 99.98% match. A son. Another sibling. Not just one secret life, but two. Two families. Two trails of deception crisscrossing through my father's careful world like spiderwebs. My mouth went dry. My fingers went numb. The box was a bomb, and it had just exploded in my lap. But the worst part, the part that made my knees go weak, was a photograph tucked at the bottom. My father standing beside a boy who looked around 14. They shared the same chin, the same solemn stare. On the back, in fading ink, Ely 2015. My brain struggled to make sense of it. This wasn't just betrayal. This was orchestration. A life curated across state lines, like a novel with alternate endings. All this time, we were only one of many chapters. Maybe not even the first. The storm outside mirrored the one inside me. I paced the room. The letters fanned out across the bed like an indictment. I thought of Emily. What would this do to her? She worshipped him. She still called him Daddy in that soft, affectionate tone. Would she hate me for what I knew? Would it destroy her the way it was destroying me? I didn't sleep that night. I didn't go to school the next day. I just sat with those letters, reading them over and over, letting the shape of this new, awful truth form in my mind like a mold spreading across everything I thought was clean. At some point, the front door clicked open. I knew it was him. I waited a moment, then walked downstairs, letters in hand. No hesitation, no ceremony. I dropped them on the kitchen table and said only 2 words. Huh? Explain this. His face went pale, then pink, then white again. He didn't speak. He sat down slowly, like someone much older than he was, and rested his hands on either side of the pile. Where did you find these? He finally asked, voice barely above a whisper. Does it matter? I shot back. Is there anyone else we should know about? He looked at me then. Not with guilt, not with anger, but with something deeper. Something that looked almost like relief. There's no one else, he said. Just Madeline. And Ailey. He paused. And you, and Emily. I laughed. Bitter. Hollow. Don't try to line us all up like ingredients in your secret recipe. We're not part of some grand experiment. He sighed. You don't understand? Then help me understand, I snapped. Help me understand how you managed to build 3 families and lie to every single one of them. Were we just placeholders? Backup plans? He didn't answer right away. He just looked past me toward the window as the storm continued to rage outside. I didn't mean for it to happen like this, he said finally. It started with Eleanor. We were young. I wasn't ready. We didn't stay together. But I didn't want to lose my son, so I stayed involved. I listened when I could. Then, years later, I met your mother. I loved her. I still do. And we built something good. I didn't tell her about Ellie because I was as afraid she wouldn't want me anymore. I told myself it was better this way. And, Rachel, I asked. Madeline. He swallowed hard. Rachel came later. After a business trip, I was weak. It was one mistake. But she got pregnant. I wanted to do the right thing, so I supported them. I didn't live with them, didn't marry her, but I never abandoned them either. I just kept everything separate. I told myself I was protecting everyone. My hands clenched into fists. You weren't protecting anyone. You were protecting yourself from having to make a choice, from losing face, from taking responsibility. He didn't deny it, didn't argue, and that silence said more than any confession ever could. I left again, this time not in a storm, not with adrenaline pulsing through me, just a quiet numbness, like walking through fog. I needed to see them. Madeline, Ellie, not just glimpses, not just letters. I needed to meet them, speak to them, ask the questions my father couldn't answer. I reached out to Madeline first. She agreed to meet again, this time in a diner halfway between our towns. We sat in a booth by the window, mugs of untouched coffee between us, and I told her everything. The box. The letters. Ella. Her reaction surprised me. She wasn't shocked. She was furious. He said I was his only mistake, she whispered, eyes burning. That he'd only ever cheated once, he promised. And now you're telling me there's another one. Another sibling I never knew about. I nodded. His name's Ely. I don't know much more than that, but I need to find him. She was quiet for a long time, then she looked at me with a fierce determination. Then let's find him. Oh, it took weeks. The letters had an old address, a P.O. box that was no longer active. Social media was a dead end. Ellie wasn't on any platform under that name. But eventually, through a series of old alumni databases and a stroke of luck from a friend who worked in university admissions, we tracked him down. He was in Boston, studying architecture, the same profession as my father. The irony wasn't lost on me. We emailed him, carefully, cautiously. We didn't dump everything on him, just enough to open a door. He replied within hours. I've been waiting for this, he wrote. I always wondered if one day you'd find me. We arranged to meet in a public park. The three of us, three siblings, pulled from the shadows of one man's double life. We sat in a triangle on the grass, unsure whether to laugh, cry, or run away. Ely was quieter than I expected, thoughtful, kind-eyed. He brought a sketch pad with him, flipping through architectural designs and half-drawn portraits. One of them looked eerily like our father. I used to draw him when I missed him, he said. He'd only visit once or twice a year. Always said it was because of work. But I always knew there was more to the story. We talked for hours, shared memories, filled in gaps, compared birthdays, laugh patterns, fears. It was strange, surreal. This bond forged not by shared childhoods, but by shared deception. And as the sun dipped below the trees, casting golden light across our impromptu gathering, I felt something unexpected peace. Not because the truth had healed us, but because we had found each other despite it. But the story wasn't finished. Not yet, because as we hugged goodbye and promised to meet again soon, Ella turned back and said something that made my blood freeze. By the way, he said, pulling something from his pocket. I found this in one of my dad's old boxes. Figured you should see it. But it was a photo. Old, faded, torn at the edges. My father, years younger, standing beside a woman who was neither Rachel nor Eleanor. She was pregnant, smiling, radiant. On the back, one word scribbled in pencil, June. The date, 1992. A full year before I was born. The storm wasn't over. It hadn't even begun. There's a certain numbness that comes after your world has been shattered not once, not twice, but again and again, each revelation carving deeper than the last. You begin to question the very architecture of your memory. What was real? What was orchestrated? When Ellie handed me that photograph, the one of our father and the mystery woman named June, pregnant and beaming in a sunlit backyard, something inside me didn't just crack. It collapsed entirely, because the photo wasn't just another piece in an already complicated puzzle. It suggested something much darker. A beginning we never knew existed. A first betrayal that predated us all. And as I stared at that photograph under the dim light of my bedroom that night, I realized we weren't the first family. We were the second, or the third, or worse, a replacement. I turned the photo over and over again, memorizing every detail. The edges of the woman's dress, the man's watch, my father's, unmistakable even in its younger version, the garden in the background with hydrangeas blooming in heavy clusters. I scanned every corner of the image for clues, anything that might reveal a location, a date, something to help me trace the identity of the woman who came before everything. The penciled note on the back simply said, June 1992, a single name and a year that felt like a chisel against stone. My birth certificate says I was born in 1993, which meant if this woman was carrying my father's child in mid-1992, there was no way I was his first. And that meant there was yet another sibling out there, possibly older, possibly living with a truth even more buried than mine. Suddenly, it wasn't just about what my father had done. It was about what he had erased, who he had erased. And I couldn't let that stand. Not now. Not after everything. The first step was the obvious one. I searched through every folder, every box, every drawer in the house for any mention of a woman named June. Nothing. No photos. No records. My father had either hidden her thoroughly or tried to erase her completely. But he wasn't the only one who might know. I thought of my mother. Silent, composed, always watching. She had known about Rachel. She had suspected something for years. Maybe she knew about June too. I waited until Sunday morning when Emily was at practice and the house was quiet. My mother stood at the kitchen sink, rinsing blueberries for a pie she'd started out of habit more than appetite. I placed the photo on the counter beside her. She didn't flinch, didn't gasp, just turned off the faucet and stared. "Where did you get this?" she asked, her voice perfectly level. "Ollie found it," I replied. "Do you know who she is?" My mother sighed, wiped her hands on a towel, and sat at the table. "Her name is June. She was your father's first love, his first mistake, and she had his child before he ever met me." The silence between us stretched long and thin, like the fragile skin of a balloon just before it pops. "Why didn't you ever tell us?" I asked. "Because it wasn't my story to tell," she said. "He made sure it stayed buried. When I married him, I knew there was something he wasn't saying. I found a letter once. He said she left town. Said she wanted nothing to do with him. That the baby wasn't his. I didn't push it. I believed him, or maybe I just wanted to." "Do you think the child survived?" I asked quietly. She looked at me then, eyes heavy with years. "I don't know. But if he or she is out there, they deserve to know." And that was enough. Enough to push me into action, to keep digging, to find out who June was, where she went, and what became of the child we never knew. I started with public records, birth registries, hospital archives. I combed through digitized newspapers from 1992, looking for announcements or obituaries. I searched high school yearbooks, college alumni lists, even property records. I found dozens of women named June who might have fit. Some were dead, some were unreachable, and then, one afternoon, I found it. A birth announcement printed in a back page of a New Haven paper from September 1992. June Whitmore welcomes a baby girl. Lyra Whitmore, born September Sind. No mention of a father, no other details, but it was a start. Lyra. The name struck me like a melody I hadn't heard before, but instantly recognized. It felt too specific, too poetic to be coincidence. I searched everything I could under that name, narrowing by age, by state, by association. And eventually, I found her. A small art gallery website in Portland listed a Lyra Whitmore as a featured painter in a local exhibit. There was a photo. Dark curls, hazel eyes, a serious expression even as she stood beside one of her swirling, abstract canvases. She looked familiar. Not in the way Madeline or Ellie had, but something in the set of her mouth. The posture, the tilt of her head. There was something of him there, of me. I hesitated for days before reaching out. What could I say that wouldn't sound insane? Hello, I'm possibly your half-sibling from a father who abandoned your mother and erased your existence for over 2 decades. Would you like to talk? But in the end, I kept it simple. I wrote it. Hi Lyra, I came across some information that may connect our families in an unexpected way. If you're open to it, I'd really appreciate the chance to speak. I left a number. I waited. 3 days later, my phone buzzed. A text. This is Lyra. I'm curious. Let's talk. We arranged a video call. I positioned my laptop on the kitchen table, heart pounding, the letters from June's era scattered nearby like talismans. And when the screen flickered and she appeared, it felt like staring into a mirror made from shadows. She looked cautious, guarded, but not unkind. I introduced myself, told her about my search, about the photo, about our father. She didn't speak for a long time, just listened. Then she turned her camera slightly, revealing something on the wall behind her, an old photograph, framed. The same one, her mother pregnant, my father beside her. My mom died 5 years ago, she said, voice steady. I always asked about him. She never gave me a name, just said he left, that he didn't want us. I didn't push. I thought she was protecting herself, or me. But I knew there had to be more. I swallowed hard. I don't know what to say. I don't know how to make any of this right. She nodded slowly. You can't, but you can tell me what you know, and maybe we can figure it out together. We talked for hours, about June, about Lyra's childhood, about art and silence and growing up with half stories. I told her about Emily, about Madeline, about Ely. Each name was another blow, another weight added to the crushing realization that she wasn't just forgotten. She was first and then replaced, but she didn't cry. She didn't even flinch. She just nodded, eyes glassy but unbroken. He left me behind, she said. But maybe he left me with enough strength to survive without him. After the call, I sat alone in the dark, trying to wrap my head around what had just happened. 4 siblings, scattered across the country like pieces of a puzzle no one had ever intended to assemble. And at the center of it all, a man who had built and buried lives with the same hands. I knew what had to come next. We had to meet, all of us, in one place, to look each other in the eyes, to stand together not as secrets or shadows, but as survivors of the same storm. I called Madeline, called Ely, told them about Lyra. They were stunned but agreed. And together we planned it. A weekend, neutral ground, a quiet cabin near the lake, no distractions, just us and the weight of truth. I texted Lyra. She hesitated, then agreed. I haven't told my father. Not yet. I don't know if I will. Maybe he doesn't deserve to know. Maybe this gathering, this healing, is ours alone. The truth he buried grew roots without him, and now we were rising from the soil, tangled but alive. As the weekend approached, I packed carefully. Old letters, photographs, a journal to write it all down. I didn't know what would happen when we stood in the same room. Would we cry? Would we scream? Would we finally understand? Or would we realize that, despite everything, the blood we shared meant less than the stories we would choose to build from the wreckage? Either way, the moment was coming, and it would change us forever. The cabin stood alone, tucked beneath a canopy of pine and cedar near an old glacial lake that didn't appear on most maps. It was the kind of place that carried silence like a second skin, where every footstep felt heavier, every word echoed a beat too long. We chose it for neutrality, for remoteness, but I think deep down we all knew this place would become sacred. Or haunted. There was no in between. 4 siblings. 4 lives bound by blood, untold history, and the web of one man's duplicity. We came together not as friends or family, not yet, but as strangers linked by invisible scars. And we were all about to take the deepest cut. Lyra was the first to arrive. She pulled up in a rental car, her hair tied back, her canvas bag slung over one shoulder like she was walking into a gallery opening rather than the culmination of a personal reckoning. She gave me a tight, uncertain smile. "You sure we're ready for this?" she asked. I nodded, though I wasn't sure either of us were. She stepped inside without another word, her presence folding into the cabin like she'd belonged there all along. Ely came next, his car dust covered from the drive, his ever-present sketchbook tucked under one arm. He hugged me, brief and tight, like we'd known each other longer than we had. Then Madeline, late as always, swept in with an energy that filled the room and unsettled it at the same time. She didn't hug. She dropped her overnight bag beside the couch and said, "Let's rip the Band-Aid off, shall we?" Typical Madeline. But her eyes gave her away. She was terrified. We gathered around the fireplace that evening, a fire already crackling, though none of us remembered lighting it. We sat in a rough square. Me, Lyra, Ellie, and Madeline, surrounded by windows that reflected our faces back at us like ghosts, as if even the glass didn't know what to make of this family. There was no script, no prepared speech, just tension, brittle and biting, strung between us like piano wire. No one spoke for a long time. I thought I'd go first. I finally said, pulling the letters from my bag. "These are from Rachel, from Eleanor, from the box I found in our basement. Some of you know pieces of this, but we need to put all the fragments on the table." I spread them out across the coffee table like tarot cards. Pages of love, apology, betrayal, and denial. Names, dates, photos, receipts, every lie carefully documented by the man who had kept us apart. Lyra reached for one letter, her fingers trembling. "This is my mother's handwriting," she whispered. I've only seen a few things she ever wrote about him. She didn't talk much. Said she wanted me to grow up clean. Her voice caught on the last word, clean. As if we were all tainted now. Ely leaned forward, scanning a photograph of our father holding a newborn. One of the earliest, probably from when Lyra was born. "He used to come to my birthday parties." Said he was my uncle. My mom let me believe it for years. I never questioned it because I wanted it to be true. He didn't look up, but he was never there on Christmas. Or on the hard days, just the good ones. I guess that was his pattern. Madeline rolled her eyes, biting her thumbnail like she always did when she was nervous. "You're all giving him way too much credit. The man was a coward." A brilliant one, sure. But a coward. He didn't just lie to you, he designed you. Us. He compartmentalized his life the way surgeons isolate infection. She threw a glance around the room, and he still got caught. I looked at her. "Then why did you come?" She stared back at me, firelight catching the shine in her eyes. "Because I wanted to see who else he fooled." That broke something open. We began talking. Not like siblings, but like investigators at a crime scene, each recounting details from their corner of the mystery. Lyra shared about the early years, the absence, the art. Ailey talked about the secret visits, the coded letters from Uncle Tom. Madeline confessed how Rachel had warned her never to seek out our father's other family, that she'd be disappointed if she did. And I. Well, I spoke about growing up in the house of a myth, thinking we were whole, only to find we were the replica. Then Lyra said something that cracked the whole night open. "Did any of you ever notice," she asked slowly, "that he didn't just have different lives, he had different versions of himself?" We stared. "I mean, in my mother's stories, he was an artist, he painted, he sketched, he was tender, sensitive. She kept one of his drawings under her pillow until she died. But you all describe an engineer, a man with rules, boundaries, hard logic. He performed for each of us, gave each mother exactly what she wanted, became who they needed him to be. It sank in like poison." She was right. We'd all known different men, and somehow they were all him. Madeline stood, paced. "So what does that mean? That he's not really any of those people? Or that he's all of them? I don't know which is worse." Silence. Ellie opened his sketchbook. He flipped to a page he hadn't shown before. On it were 4 faces. Ours. Stylized. Interwoven with tree roots that curled and tangled around the edges. In the center, our father's silhouette. Blank. Faceless. "I drew this the night after I learned about Lyra," he said. I kept trying to draw him, but I couldn't decide which version to use, so I left him blank. That image, the faceless father, rooted in 4 distinct lives, summed up everything we couldn't say. We were his legacy, whether we wanted to be or not. And now we had a choice of keep orbiting his absence, or rewrite what family could mean. That night we cooked dinner together. Spaghetti and garlic bread, the only thing Madeline said she wouldn't mess up. We ate slowly, laughed once or twice, told the kind of stories people tell when they don't know how to process grief. Later, we pulled mattresses into the living room, sleeping in a crooked, silent constellation. For a few hours, we were together, not healed, but seen. The next morning, as sunlight filtered through pine branches, I woke to find Lyra standing outside by the lake, wrapped in a blanket. I joined her. "You know what I kept thinking about last night," she said. "That if we hadn't met, we never would have known who we were missing. But now that we have, I don't want to go back." "Neither do I," she turned to me. "So what now?" And I didn't have a clear answer. But I knew it started with truth, with a meeting. I called him. It took everything I had. My fingers hesitated over the number a dozen times before I pressed call. When he answered, his voice cracked like he hadn't used it in days. "Hello?" "It's me," I said. "We're at the cabin." All of us. A silence. "I want you to come." No speeches, no excuses. Just come. We're not children anymore. But we deserve to be heard. He didn't reply. I thought he might hang up. But then, "I'll be there by evening." And so we waited. Madeline was against it. Lyra was torn. Ellie said nothing, just drew quietly in the corner. When the knock finally came, none of us moved at first. It was like standing before a vault door we'd all sealed years ago. I opened it. He stood there in a gray coat, older than I remembered, smaller somehow. Not the man from the photos, not the one from our memories, just a man who looked as lost as we felt. We didn't say hello. We just stepped aside. He entered the cabin like a trespasser, his eyes moving across our faces with disbelief, or guilt, or something worse, regret. We sat around the fireplace again, and he spoke first. "I don't expect forgiveness. I don't even expect understanding. But I came because I need you to know one thing." We waited. "I loved each of you, in the only ways I knew how. And I failed you all." It wasn't enough. But it was a beginning. Madeline stood, walked to the fireplace. She took one of the letters, fed it into the flames. "We're done being defined by you," she said, watching it curl and blacken. Then she turned. "We're going to decide who we are, not you." And one by one, we followed, letting go, not to erase him, but to free ourselves. From the lies, from the silence, from the man who was everything and nothing at once. The fire burned brighter, and in that light, we began to write a new story, one that belonged to us. It's strange how something can feel both like an ending and a beginning, like a tide pulling you away from shore only to deliver you someplace else you didn't know you needed to go. That night at the cabin, as the fire ate away at the last of the letters, photographs, and remnants of a man's carefully constructed lies, we didn't just shed our anger, we shed our names. The versions of us that had been built in relation to him. His daughter, his mistake, his secret, were burned to ash, and what remained were people, raw and untethered, ready to define themselves for the first time. He left before sunrise. Didn't say goodbye. Just placed a small box on the coffee table and walked out into the dark, his coat flapping like a tired flag in the wind. We didn't follow. We let him go. For once, we didn't need closure from him. We had found something better, each other. Inside the box were things he never intended us to see. Or maybe, things he had finally found the courage to give. A pendant that once belonged to June. A tiny music box engraved with Rachel's name, a half-finished sketch of a baby. Ellie, maybe, or Lyra. And a journal. His pages of scribbled thoughts, regrets, scattered memories. No polished explanations, just pieces. He had tried to write about us, but never finished. Each section ended mid-sentence, as if the truth itself had overwhelmed him. The journal was passed around in silence. No one read aloud. No one cried. It didn't matter what he'd written anymore. His words didn't have the power they once did. We had our own now. We stayed another day in the cabin. There was no plan, no structure. Just long walks along the shore, quiet meals cooked together, laughter that came unexpectedly and unforced. In that stillness, we began to stitch something real from the wreckage. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. But it was acceptance. That we had been hurt, that we had been denied, that we had been made to believe we were fragments when we had always been whole. Lyra brought out her paints. She set up a small canvas by the lake and began to capture the view. Trees, water, shadows. But she didn't paint what was there. She painted what she felt. A house with 4 rooms, each with an open door. Light pouring out, roots curling beneath intertwined. No figure in the windows. No need for one. Ely added a drawing to the cabin wall before we left. Not one of our father this time. It was a drawing of us. The 4 of us sitting on that bench by the lake. No labels, no hierarchy. Just presence. When we saw it, none of us spoke for a long time. Madeline walked up and traced the edge with her finger. "No, that's a family portrait," she whispered. We went home after that. Each to our own cities, our own lives, but everything was different. The threads that had once pulled us apart now kept us tied together in the most unexpected ways. We didn't drift. We called. Texted. Visited. Birthdays were remembered. Stories were shared. Secrets lost their power. We weren't just siblings. We were something more powerful, witnesses to each other's becoming, to the truth that no single man could erase the worth we found in one another. Emily was the hardest part. I hadn't told her the full story yet. She was still living in the echo chamber of our father's curated world, still carrying that unbroken image. I invited her to meet everyone, told her the broad strokes, enough to soften the edges, and when she finally agreed, it wasn't with anger, it was with curiosity. She met us in New Haven one cold Saturday in December. Lyra brought her newest paintings. Ellie showed off a design he was working on for a museum. Madeline, in a rare moment of softness, baked cookies. And Emily, she sat in the middle of us, listening, watching, processing. When she asked about our father, no one flinched. We told her what she needed to know. Not to destroy her version of him, but to show her ours. Later, when we walked alone through the snow-dusted park, she turned to me and said, "I'm not mad. I'm sad. But I'm glad I know now. I don't want to be lied to anymore. Not by him. Not by anyone. Neither did I." The spring that followed was the first one in years that didn't feel heavy. We planned a reunion. This time, not out of obligation, but celebration. We rented a larger cabin, one with space for everyone. Partners, friends, even our mother came, hesitant but curious. She met Lyra, spoke with Rachel on the phone. Forgave Eleanor in a letter she sent without fanfare. They had all been women orbiting the same man. None of them enemies, all of them victims of the same story told in different rooms. That weekend, something unspoken happened. We stopped needing to talk about him. He became a footnote, not the headline. We had other things to discuss. Ella's graduation, Lyra's gallery showing, Madeline's new job, Emily's engagement. Life had begun to bloom again. Not despite the past, but because we had learned to let it live behind us. And then, a letter came him, from a lawyer. He had passed away, quietly, alone, a heart attack in a motel near the border of Vermont and New Hampshire. No will, no final words. Just a single item left behind with instructions to be sent to any of my children who wish to receive it. It was a box. We received it a week later. Inside was a single object. A puzzle, wooden, intricate. The kind you had to solve by touch and time and patience. A note sat beneath it. "This was always my favorite thing. I could never solve it. Maybe one of you will." No name, no signature. Just that. We placed the puzzle in Lyra's studio. None of us wanted to keep it alone. It belonged to all of us, or none of us. And maybe that was his last message. In whatever broken, cryptic way he could manage. That in the end, he couldn't solve the very thing he'd built. That the family he fractured had finally become whole without him. Sometimes I think about him. Not often. But when I do, it's not with rage anymore. It's with a strange sort of pity. For the man who had everything, love, children, time, and never knew how to hold any of it. He built so many lives and left them all half-finished, like sketches on a napkin, like letters never sent. But we finished the story. We stood in the same room, told the truth, burned the lies, and stayed. Not because we had to, but because we chose to. And that choice, that's what made us a family. Not his blood, not his name, but our decision to be more than the sum of his failures. To look at one another and say, "You are not my mistake. You are my sibling." And in that truth, we finally became our own. Thanks for watching the video. Subscribe and like the video.